At my husband's sister's engagement. The tag pinned to my chest read, Housekeeper. His mother smirked as she adjusted her pearl bracelet. You're just staff here. No chair. No plate. No place. My husband chuckled soft. Cruel amusement that carried louder than it should have. Food is for family. In that moment, something inside me shattered quietly. But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, unclipped my wedding ring with calm precision, and set it on the table before him. Then I'm no longer yours, I said. Alexander's smile froze. His laughter died mid-breath, but I already knew this was just the beginning. He didn't realize I'd been standing outside our bedroom door 2 nights earlier when he called his mother. Mom's right. She needs to learn her position, he'd said, his voice sharp, condescending. The housekeeper badge is perfect. Maybe after this, Victoria will stop pretending her little business matters. I stood in the hallway holding a basket of freshly ironed shirts, every word sinking deeper into me like needles. He laughed, actually laughed while planning my humiliation. I set the basket down without a sound, walked to my office, and opened the folder I'd labeled insurance. Inside were 6 months of documented evidence of Alexander's embezzlement from his firm. I had hoped never to use it. But that night, as he mocked me from the next room, I began drafting an anonymous SEC whistleblower report. The irony wasn't lost on me. While he plotted to strip away my dignity, I was quietly preparing the downfall of his entire career. The laundry basket still waited in the hallway. His Brooks Brothers shirts were pressed perfectly, exactly 1 inch of starch in each collar. Just the way he demanded. For 5 years I'd done his laundry. Not because we couldn't afford help, but because Alexander said it showed devotion. The same devotion that had me waking at 5:45 every morning to brew his Colombian coffee while reviewing financial reports for struggling small businesses, my clients. My little business, as he liked to call it. He never understood that while he slept, I was saving families from bankruptcy. My home office had become a command center of survival. 2 monitors glowed with spreadsheets from Romano's restaurant, one of Chicago's oldest family-owned eateries. Hemorrhaging $30, 000, a month. I'd identified everything that was killing them food costs at 47% when they should have been under 30. 3 vendors overcharging. A menu that hadn't changed in a decade. I wasn't just fixing businesses, I was protecting legacies. But to Alexander, I was merely playing businesswoman. That night, the insurance folder felt heavier than its weight. 6 months earlier, I'd noticed odd discrepancies in his files. He'd grown careless, leaving Lakeshore Capital documents scattered across his desk. Confident that I was too busy with my little projects to understand private equity. But I understood every line. I saw portfolio expenses that didn't add up, personal trips disguised as company write-offs, and transactions funneling investor money into secret accounts. I documented everything: photographs, encrypted backups, meticulous notes. I'd even consulted Margaret Brennan, a former federal prosecutor turned corporate attorney. When I showed her the evidence, she said simply, "This is criminal. Victoria, when you're ready, it ends his career." I hadn't been ready until now. From the bedroom, Alexander's voice carried through the house. "The engagement party will be perfect," he told his mother. "Zoe's marrying real money. It's time Victoria understood the difference between real success and pretending." Serafina's laugh floated through the speaker high. Brittle. Venom disguised as sophistication. "She saved your father's company." "Yes, but that doesn't make her family. Help is help, no matter how well dressed." Help? That's what I'd been reduced to. 18 months earlier. I'd spent sleepless weeks saving Hawthorne manufacturing his father's company from collapse. Richard Hawthorne had built it over 3 decades. But the pandemic nearly destroyed it. Traditional consultants wanted $400. 000 just to assess. I restructured the entire operation for $130. Ling ling ling. Pivoted their production to ventilator components. and renegotiated union contracts without strikes. 200 workers kept their jobs because of me. But in their eyes, I was still help. Every Thursday dinner at Serafina's Gold Coast mansion had become a ritual of subtle cruelty. She'd sip her wine and say to her guests, "Victoria keeps busy with her little consulting project." The words little and project landed like darts. She never acknowledged that Nexus Advisory, my firm, had just crossed 7 figures in annual revenue. I'd built it from scratch with $5, 0 inches savings and desperation that tasted metallic. 50 cold calls. 49 rejections. 1 desperate yes from Jeppy's Pizzeria. I'd saved them from closure. And soon word spread. Within a year, I had 17 clients and a waiting list. But at home, my success was treated like a hobby, a distraction to keep me from embarrassing my husband. He was wrong about that, too. While he was busy pretending to be a financial titan, I'd been documenting everything. His falsified portfolio reports, his unauthorized fund transfers, the girlfriend at the Palmer House Hotel, whose perfume lingered on his shirts every Friday. Marriage meant protecting each other, or so I believed, but Alexander's version meant protecting himself at all costs. 2 weeks before the engagement, Zoe, his youngest sister, showed up at my doorstep crying. She was 27. Blonde. Kind. And far too gentle for the family she came from. She looked like a child again in her oversized Northwestern hoodie. "I think I'm making a mistake," she whispered. I pulled her inside. We sat at my kitchen table with cups of tea, while she twisted her diamond ring nervously. "Daniel wants to get married next month," she said. "He says we shouldn't wait until spring. He wants the prenup signed immediately." I asked to see it. She hesitated, then handed me a neatly folded document. My stomach turned as I read. It stripped her of all rights to his company, any future companies, even confidentiality clauses, forbidding her to speak about his business dealings. When she'd asked for her own lawyer, he'd called her dramatic. That night, after she left, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and began researching Daniel Morrison's fintech startup, Pure Metrics. On paper, it looked impressive. 2 million users, 40% quarterly growth, partnerships with major banks. But something about the numbers felt too clean. By dawn, I'd uncovered the truth. The users were bots. The partnerships were fake. The entire company was a balloon of lies, seconds away from bursting. He wasn't marrying Zoe for love. He was marrying her for her trust fund to keep his fraud afloat. I compiled every piece of evidence, not because I planned to expose him immediately, but because timing was everything. Zoe needed to see it for herself. And when she did, she'd need someone she could trust. 3 days later, Serafina called me herself, a rare occurrence. "Victoria, darling," she purred. That tone always meant one thing: money. "There's a small hiccup with the estate taxes from Richard's passing. 50美元, 000, due by month's end." Estate taxes. Richard had been dead 2 years. The taxes were long settled. "Send me the documentation," I said calmly. "I'll pay the IRS directly." Silence. Then, "Oh, it's easier if you just transfer the funds to my account. I'll handle the paperwork." I agreed. Then I hired a forensic accountant. Within days, we discovered Serafina had hidden $2, 3 million in offshore accounts during her divorce money that legally belonged to her ex-husband. The $50, 000, she'd requested from me wasn't for taxes. It was for her next shopping spree. By the time the engagement invitation arrived, addressed only to Mr. Sevenes and arrived, Alexander Hawthorne, I'd stopped expecting decency from any of them. When I asked about it, Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "Mom probably forgot to include your name. You know how she is with details." But Serafina Hawthorne never forgot details. She remembered the vintage of every wine she'd served, the price of every guest's jewelry. My exclusion was deliberate. Should I RSVP for both of us? I asked. Obviously, he said. Just wear something understated. You don't want to outshine the bride. That night, I stood in front of my closet, surrounded by the symbols of a life I'd built to fit someone else's world. Dresses chosen to blend in, not stand out. Outfits meant to please, not empower. I pulled out a simple black dress, the kind you could wear to a business dinner or a funeral. It would work for both. Saturday came with the sharp chill of late September. I got ready in silence. My reflection calm but unrecognizable. This wasn't nervousness. It was focus the clarity before battle. Alexander left early, claiming client drinks. I drove myself to Crystal Gardens alone. As I stepped through the marble doors, whispers followed. That's her, the consultant wife. The one he lets play business. I smiled politely, my heels clicking with steady rhythm across the polished floor. At the check-in table, the young attendant hesitated. Flipping through the guest list, her smile faltered. I'm sorry. Could you repeat your name? Victoria Hawthorne, I said evenly. Her hand trembled as she pulled a badge from under the table and slid it toward me. Serafina appeared beside her. Perfectly timed. Pearls gleaming. The badge read, in elegant script, Victoria Housekeeper. Oh, Victoria, she said sweetly, loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. You're just staff here. The room fell silent. Every whisper in that marble lobby seemed to echo, expanding until it filled the room. The housekeeper, someone murmured. The one who saved Hawthorne Manufacturing, another voice answered. Apparently, she's the help now. I picked up the badge, studied it, then pinned it to my chest like a war medal. Shall I escort you to the service entrance? Serafina asked. Her lips curved in a victorious smile. No need, I replied. I'll find my way. I walked straight into the ballroom. The lights shimmered against crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed chairs, and floral arrangements that cost more than a month's rent for most families. Table 3. Our table was placed in perfect view of the head table, a display of family pride and social hierarchy. Except there were only 7 chairs instead of 8. The missing one, the one meant for me, stood out like a scar. No one spoke as I stood beside it. The mayor's wife looked away. A hedge fund manager's wife covered her mouth to hide a smirk. Every polished face seemed to glow with curiosity, waiting to see if I'd crumble. But I didn't. When Alexander arrived 40 minutes later, the room's hum softened to an expectant hush. He entered with the confidence of a man who thought the world still belonged to him, collar crisp, glass in hand. 3 whiskeys in, his mother's face brightened as if salvation had walked through the door. He saw me. The badge, the missing chair, the crowd watching, and he laughed. A deep, amused laugh that vibrated through the room like a cruel chord. Relax. Victoria, he said, slipping into his seat. Food is for family. That was the moment I understood something irreversible. My marriage hadn't died slowly. It had been dead all along. I just hadn't noticed the corpse. I reached for my wedding ring, slid it off my finger with deliberate slowness. The diamond caught the light, scattering reflections across the tablecloth. When I placed it down, the sound was louder than it should have been. One soft click that silenced a ballroom. Then I'm no longer yours, I said, for a heartbeat. No one moved. Then whispers erupted, gasps. Murmurs. Phones raised discreetly to capture the scene. Alexander's laughter died. His face froze between arrogance and disbelief. His mother's lips parted in horror, her champagne flute trembling. I turned and walked away, heels echoing across the marble. Each step was a declaration. Behind me, chaos bloomed, voices rising. Serafina's sharp hiss of Alexander. Do something, followed by the frantic shuffle of chairs. But I didn't turn around. In that moment, I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was stepping out of an illusion. Outside, The night air was sharp and cold. The valet handed me my keys without meeting my eyes. He'd seen everything. As I pulled out of the parking lot, the glittering lights of the venue reflected in my windshield like ghosts of the life I'd just buried. By the time I reached home, the numbness had turned into a steady flame of purpose. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and called James Fitzgerald, my senior analyst at Nexus Advisory. Execute Project Revelation, I said. There was a pause, just long enough for him to understand the weight of it. Confirming, he said. Asset freeze protocols initiating now. We'd built Project Revelation months earlier, an emergency plan designed for this exact moment. It contained every piece of evidence against Alexander, the doctored reports, the diverted investor funds, the falsified expense sheets. Within an hour, the SEC would have everything. I drove through Lincoln Park, quiet and empty at that late hour, the city lights flickering through my windshield. The hum of the tires on the road felt steady, grounding. The woman who'd been publicly stripped of her dignity had just begun to dismantle her husband's empire. By the time I reached home, my phone buzzed with call after call. Alexander, his office line, the partner conference room, 17 missed calls in total. The voicemails began politely. Victoria, this is ridiculous. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Call me back. Then they shifted. We need to discuss this rationally. You're emotional. Let's talk through this. And finally, the partners are asking questions. Do you understand what you've done? You're destroying everything we built. Everything we built. I laughed out loud. He had built nothing but illusions. I'd built a company, a livelihood, a reputation. I'd built everything real while he played with borrowed money and borrowed time. At 5:30 the next morning, the doorbell rang. Margaret Brennan stood there in her immaculate gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase that could have paid someone's tuition. She'd driven straight from Lake Forest after James called. Let's review your options, she said briskly. Stepping inside, we sat at the dining table, the one where Alexander and I used to have breakfast in silence. Margaret laid out folders like a general preparing for war. The first folder held proof of his affair's hotel receipts, photographs, signed witness statements. The prenuptial clause is airtight, she said, tapping the paper. Infidelity forfeits all claims to marital assets. He gets nothing. The second folder contained the evidence of embezzlement. This is prison-level fraud, she said, her tone calm, but decisive. The SEC filing will trigger immediate asset seizures. His partners will cut him off within days. And then came the third folder, one I hadn't expected to see. Serafina's offshore accounts. My accountant had traced the Cayman deposits back to her during the divorce settlement with Richard's brother, William. She'd hidden millions while crying poverty in court. Margaret smiled faintly as she closed the folder. Her ex-husband's attorney will be delighted. We worked for hours. Every move was deliberate. Every contingency mapped. By noon, the path ahead was clear. It wouldn't just be revenge, it would be justice. Executed cleanly. Within the law. That evening, I received a call from Zoe. Her voice was small, trembling. Can I come over? 10 minutes later, she stood in my doorway. Mascara smudged. Clutching printed pages. I researched Daniel's company, she said, spreading documents across my kitchen counter. The numbers don't make sense. The partnerships don't exist. It's all fake. Isn't it? I nodded. Yes. She broke down crying. I made her tea and sat with her on the floor, explaining what I'd found weeks earlier, how Daniel had inflated user counts, forged contracts, and targeted her trust fund to survive his next funding round. When she could finally speak again, she whispered, "While Mom was calling you the housekeeper, you were the only one who protected me." Her words hit harder than any insult Serafina had ever thrown, because they were true. Zoe was the only Hawthorne who had ever treated me like family. We stayed up until nearly midnight, planning how she would confront Daniel, protect her finances, and extricate herself legally. I gave her Margaret's card and told her I'd cover the fees. When she left, she hugged me so tightly it hurt. "You were the only one who ever acted like family," she said. After she was gone, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by empty teacups and piles of evidence. Tomorrow, the documents would be filed, the accounts frozen, and the Hawthorne empire would begin to collapse. But tonight, I finally understood what I was fighting for. Not just revenge, not humiliation, something deeper. Justice for the people they'd crushed under their polished shoes. Protection for the one innocent person in their family. The quiet in my townhouse that night felt different, like the calm before sunrise. Not before a storm. I closed my laptop, exhaled slowly, and let the silence settle. Tomorrow would begin with fire. Monday morning arrived with a kind of clarity that only comes when everything fake has finally burned away. The air outside was crisp, the sunlight sharp. I was already at my desk when the first domino fell. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Serafina. I played it on speaker while scrolling through my morning emails. Her voice was shrill, trembling at the edges. "You vindictive little nobody. Do you have any idea what you've done? William's attorney just served me papers. They know about the Cayman accounts. They know everything." Her message went on for 3 minutes, swinging between fury and panic. She threatened lawsuits, then begged for leniency. By the end, she was sobbing. The polished matriarch of the Gold Coast reduced to a voice cracking under the weight of her own deceit. I deleted the voicemail and opened an email from Margaret Brennan. The subject line was 2 words, clawback initiated. Within hours, Serafina's accounts were frozen. Her Range Rover repossessed. Her social circle evaporated overnight. She had spent decades measuring worth by status. And now she was bankrupt financially and morally. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang again. James Fitzgerald. "You need to see something," he said. "Check your email." A video was attached. Security footage from Lakeshore Capitol. Alexander's office. The recording began with him sitting behind his desk at 7:43 a.m., scrolling through his computer. He frowned. Then his face twisted confusion. Then fear. Then rage. Suddenly, he picked up his laptop and hurled it against the glass wall. It shattered with a crack that made me flinch even from behind the screen. What came next was worse. He screamed at his assistant to get his lawyer. Papers flew. 3 junior analysts stood frozen outside, filming everything with their phones. "It's already viral," James said. "Hawthorne meltdown. It's everywhere." I opened Twitter. There it was, the video of Alexander's explosion set to classical music. Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, playing softly in the background. The comment section was merciless. Former employees calling him a tyrant. Investor demanding audits. By noon, financial blogs had picked up the story. His career was collapsing in real time. I watched once. Silently. It wasn't joy. I felt it was something colder. Quieter. Justice. Wednesday brought more fallout. Sue called me in disbelief. Mom tried to go to her tennis match today. They boxed up her locker and escorted her out of the club. Even the Chicago Athletic Club, the temple of her social superiority, had revoked her membership. Everyone saw. Zoe continued. "Mrs. Chin took a photo. The image spread through their circles like wildfire. Serafina, in designer tennis whites, clutching a cardboard box while security guards walked beside her. The mighty reduced to the mundane. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, he just felt finished. The game she started was over. And all that was left was silence. Thursday morning, James arrived at my office with that expression he wore when he'd uncovered an opportunity. "Crystal Gardens is in trouble," he said. I looked up from my laptop. Surprised. "The venue." He nodded. "Laying out papers. Bad contracts. Unpaid taxes. Hemorrhaging cash. They're desperate for a buyer. Asking $2 million. But they'll take $800,000 cash. It's a steal. I stared at the numbers. Realization dawning. The very place where I had been labeled housekeeper was about to be mine for less than half its value. How soon can we close? I asked. James smiled. Within the month. Do it. I said. Run it through Nexus Advisory's holding company. Keep it quiet for now. He hesitated. You're buying the site of your humiliation. I looked out the window at the skyline. The city glittering with a cruel kind of beauty. No, I said. I'm reclaiming it. He smiled again. Understanding. There's something else, he said. Tapping the papers. Serafina's charity gala is booked there in December. Perfect. We'll honor her contract, I said. Under new management and new policies. Modifications, he asked. One eyebrow raised. Yes. No degrading name badges. No class division. Everyone gets treated equally. And make sure the ownership is displayed prominently at the entrance. James nodded, half grinning. You really are something. Victoria. That afternoon, I signed the preliminary purchase agreement. The same ballroom that had once hosted my public humiliation would soon belong to me. When I returned to my office, a new message waited on my phone. From an unknown number, Rebecca Lansing, Alexander's mistress. He's been calling me nonstop. Her message read, begging for help. I thought you should know I'm testifying to the SEC tomorrow. I have all the receipts. The trips. The gifts. I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. For a long moment, I just stared at the text. Even his mistress had more integrity than he did. By Friday morning, I sent 3 emails to the CEOs of the portfolio companies Alexander had defrauded through Lakeshore Capital. Each contained detailed evidence of his fund misallocation and a single recommendation: convene an emergency board review immediately. The response was swift. Michael Chin from Pinnacle Tech called first. Victoria, these documents, are they real? They are, I said. Every receipt is authenticated. By 1100A.M. Lakeshore Capital held an emergency board meeting. I wasn't there, but James called me during a recess. It's chaos, he whispered. The partners are tearing each other apart. Alexander's been caught diverting over $3 million in client funds. They're moving to suspend him indefinitely. By 3:00 p.m. It was official. Alexander was placed on leave. His accounts frozen. His equity stake revoked. Security escorted him from the building while 2 guards watched him pack a box of personal belongings. The video leaked by evening. Alexander Hawthorne, once the pride of Lakeshore Capital, walking through the lobby carrying a cardboard box. The same smug partners who'd once toasted his deals now refused to meet his gaze. He looked smaller, not just disgraced, diminished. That night, Zoe called again, her voice trembling but stronger than before. I confronted Daniel, she said. He denied everything until I showed him your evidence. She described it in detail. How he crumbled, fell to his knees, confessed. The users were bots. The partnerships were fake. The engagement was a financial strategy. Not love. He begged me to marry him anyway, she said, her voice laced with disgust. Said if we got married. I couldn't testify against him. I told him the wedding was off and blocked his number. Her final words came out as a whisper. You saved me from marrying a criminal. I leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling something close to peace. You saved yourself. Zoe, I just handed you the truth. For the first time, she laughed, a real, bright sound that filled the silence. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat in the same chair where I'd once cried quietly over Alexander's neglect. My phone buzzed again. A notification from my doorbell camera Alexander. He stood on my porch, swaying slightly. His expensive suit wrinkled and stained, his tie undone. He pounded on the door, shouting my name. Victoria opened the door. We need to talk. I didn't move. Through the camera feed, I watched him alternate between anger and pleading. You think you've won, he shouted. You're destroying everything we built. Then his voice cracked. It was just a joke. The badge, it was Mom's idea. You know I love you. Vic. Love. I almost laughed. The words sounded foreign coming from his mouth. He sank down onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. The man who'd once called me his greatest asset was now a ghost begging for scraps of mercy. After 20 minutes, he stumbled into an Uber, one still charged to the credit card I hadn't yet removed my name from. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. My hands were steady, my breath calm. By morning, the restraining order would be filed, and by the end of the week, Alexander would finally understand what it meant to lose everything. Saturday morning came with an eerie stillness, the kind of silence that follows a storm, not peace, but aftermath. I woke to a flood of notifications, articles, legal updates, messages from clients and acquaintances, each carrying the same undercurrent of fascination and disbelief. Alexander Hawthorne, managing partner at Lakeshore Capital, under federal investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The headlines were relentless. His downfall had become the city's newest form of entertainment. By noon, Margaret called with a tone of quiet satisfaction. The SEC moved fast. They've frozen all known assets and issued subpoenas for every Lakeshore account Alexander touched. He'll be served within 48 hours. I listened in silence as she listed the cascading consequences: frozen accounts, suspended partnerships, seized investments. Everything he'd built on deceit was unraveling. When she paused, I asked softly, "And the townhouse?" "Seized," she said. "Purchased with diverted funds. It'll go to auction next month." The same house where I'd pressed his shirts and made his morning coffee would now be an evidence exhibit. Somehow, that felt right. By evening, James arrived at my townhouse carrying a folder and 2 cups of coffee. "You should see this," he said, setting the folder down. Inside were the finalized acquisition papers for Crystal Gardens. "It's done," he said. "You're officially the owner." I ran my hand across the embossed seal, the weight of it anchoring me to the moment. The same venue where I had stood without a chair, wearing that humiliating badge, now belonged to me. "I want a press conference," I said. "Next week?" He nodded without surprise. "I thought you might." That night, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer where I'd kept the badge Victoria. Housekeeper. The cardstock was thick, the lettering elegant. Expensive. I'd preserved it not as a wound but as proof of what I'd survived. Soon, it would hang framed in my office, not as shame but as declaration. On Wednesday afternoon, the ballroom of Crystal Gardens looked entirely different in daylight. Gone were the chandeliers dripping with pretension. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating polished marble floors that reflected clean, open space. I stood behind the podium, cameras flashing, reporters poised. My voice didn't shake. "Crystal Gardens," I began, "will operate under new principles, effective immediately. This venue will host events rooted in equality and dignity. No class hierarchies, no name badges meant to demean or divide. Everyone who enters these doors will be treated with the same respect." A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. I held up a sample of the new name tag: simple, minimal, bearing only a person's first name. "In this ballroom last year," I continued, "someone believed humiliation could measure worth. Today, we begin to rewrite that story." Flashes burst like lightning across the room. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune raised her hand. "Mrs. Hawthorne, what about existing bookings? There was a high-profile charity gala planned here next month. Wasn't there? I smiled. Yes, Mrs. Serafina Hawthorne's annual fundraising event. All contracts are being honored under our new guidelines. Unfortunately, any event, unwilling to meet our equality standards, will need to find another venue. The silence that followed was delicious. I could almost feel Serafina somewhere across the city. Reading that statement, and realizing her reign was over. After the conference ended, Margaret called. It's official, she said. The investigation found evidence of $2 million misappropriated by Alexander. The DOJ is pursuing federal charges. I closed my eyes and exhaled. He'll go to prison. Won't he? Almost certainly, she said. And his partners are throwing him to the wolves. That evening, as twilight deepened over the city, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. On one tab, an article about the scandal. On another, the plans for Crystal Garden's first community event, a free wedding ceremony for immigrant couples who'd waited years to afford one. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. By the time the city lights flickered to life, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace without guilt. The next morning, I received an email from Helena Morrison, senior partner at Lakeshore Capital. The subject line read simply, apology. She wanted to meet in person. We met at a Kit Cafe in Wicker Park. Far from the skyscrapers and glass towers where Alexander once strutted through meetings like a king, Helena looked exhausted. Her power suits replaced by something more human, a soft gray sweater. No jewelry. I should have investigated sooner, she said. 6 months ago. I noticed small discrepancies, but Alexander was convincing, and I let it slide. She slid a folder across the table. These are referrals. CEOs who need restructuring consultants. People who value integrity over image. I opened it and found 12 names, each one an opportunity worth millions. Why are you doing this? I asked. She sighed. Because you were right. You built something real. I built illusions. Maybe this is my way of making it right. Her honesty disarmed me. For the first time, I saw a woman not hiding behind power, but shedding it. 3 days later, 3 of the referrals turned into contracts, each worth 7 figures. Nexus Advisory wasn't just surviving, it was expanding. I hired 6 new consultants to handle the workload. My little business had become Chicago's most respected restructuring firm. A week later, Zoe called with good news of her own. You won't believe it, she said breathlessly. I got accepted into the Booth Scholars Program, full scholarship. I'm studying ethical finance. I smiled so hard it hurt. You earned it. Her voice softened. I couldn't have without you. That weekend, I attended the Chicago Women in Business Conference. I wasn't scheduled to speak, just to listen. Observe. Maybe recruit. But halfway through the afternoon session, the moderator announced a surprise guest speaker. Zoe. She stepped onto the stage in a simple black suit, her hair neatly tied back. The crowd quieted as she began. 2 months ago, I was engaged to a man who was committing fraud, she said clearly. And I nearly married him because I believed the illusion he built. I would have destroyed my own future, if not for someone who saw the truth and cared enough to show me. Her eyes met mine across the room. That person was Victoria Hawthorne. The room fell silent, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She saved me from becoming collateral damage in someone else's deception, and she taught me something that will guide me forever. Real family protects you, even when they don't owe you anything. The applause started softly, then grew until it filled the hall. I sat there, tears blurring the lights. I hadn't sought public validation, but watching Zoe find her voice, her confidence, her strength, that was the truest reward. After the conference, she found me in the lobby and hugged me tightly. They're asking me to help design a new curriculum on business ethics, she said. Can you believe that? I laughed. Yes, I can. That evening, I drove to Crystal Gardens. The ballroom was empty, lit only by soft amber lights. Tomorrow, it would host its first community celebration, a citizenship ceremony for 30 immigrant families. I walked across the marble floor where I'd once stood without a chair, and I placed a single flower on the center table. 1 year ago, they'd tried to erase me in this room. Now, I owned it, and this time, every chair would be filled. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass roof of Crystal Gardens, scattering into warm shards across the ballroom floor. The space smelled faintly of lilies and coffee, simple, human scents that replaced the cold luxury that once ruled here. The maintenance crew had finished setting up 30 round tables for the citizenship ceremony. Each table had identical place cards, first names only. No titles. No hierarchies. When the families began to arrive, nervous, proud, carrying toddlers in their best clothes, the entire building seemed to hum with quiet joy. I stood near the entrance, greeting each person, watching as the same marble that had once witnessed my humiliation now reflected their triumph. They were exactly the kind of people Serafina would have called common. And yet, standing there, I realized they embodied more grace and dignity than any ballroom of the elite ever had. By noon, the ceremony began. When the new citizens raised their right hands and took the oath, I felt tears I hadn't expected welling in my eyes. Their voices rose together, steady, trembling, hopeful. It was the sound of belonging, and for the first time in years, I felt it too. That night, I hosted a small dinner in the same ballroom, a celebration not of revenge, but of renewal. Around the circular table sat the people who had stood by me when everything fell apart. James Fitzgerald, the strategist who executed Project Revelation with unflinching precision. Margaret Brennan, immaculata as ever, sipping her wine like victory itself. Tony Romano, whose restaurant I had saved from bankruptcy, brought homemade tiramisu. Lisa Chong, who had once stood on the edge of losing her family's Chinese restaurant, came with her daughter, now a Northwestern graduate, beaming with quiet pride. And then Zoe arrived. She wore a navy dress. Simple, elegant, unbranded. She had changed so much since the trembling girl who'd shown up at my door in tears. There was confidence in her eyes now. A calm that only comes from surviving disillusionment and choosing integrity anyway. 1 year, she said softly, looking around the ballroom. Hard to believe this is where everything started. Or where it started to end. I said with a smile. We laughed, not the bitter kind of laughter that hides pain, but the free, unguarded kind that comes when you've finally made peace with your scars. The conversation flowed easily. Stories of businesses rebuilt, lives repaired, people who'd chosen honesty over comfort. When James raised his glass, the others followed suit. To resilience, he said, and to Victoria, who proved that being dismissed as just staff can be the beginning of becoming indispensable. The toast caught me off guard. My throat tightened. I looked at the faces around the table, people who had once been clients. Now, family. Real family. The kind that's earned, not inherited. After dinner, when the guests left, I stayed behind, walking the quiet hallways of Crystal Gardens. The sound of my heels against the marble echoed softly. I reached my office upstairs, my new office overlooking the ballroom. On the wall, framed in museum-quality glass, hung the badge that started it all. Victoria Housekeeper. The cream cardstock was preserved perfectly. The lettering as sharp as the day it was printed. Clients often asked about it. Curious. And I always told them the truth. That badge was meant to define my place. I'd say. Instead, it reminded me to build a place where everyone belongs. It had become a symbol. Not of shame, but of transformation. The following week, Margaret called again, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. You'll want to hear this, she said. Alexander took a play deal. 2 years, federal time. plus restitution. His assets are gone. The townhouse. Both Porsches. The Belmont Harbor boat all seized. I felt no triumph. No thrill. Just the quiet satisfaction of justice fulfilled. And Serafina, I asked. Margaret chuckled softly. Working as a receptionist. A dental office in Naperville. $15 an hour. Plus bénéfice. She goes by Sarah Whitmore now. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The image formed itself Serafina behind a desk, answering phones for the kind of middle-class families she once dismissed as beneath her. The woman who had announced to a room of 300 that I was just staff had finally learned what that actually meant. She'll be fine, I said finally. It's honest work. Yes, Margaret agreed. And for her, that's the harshest punishment possible. That evening, I stood in my new penthouse, overlooking Lake Michigan. It wasn't ostentatious, just glass, sunlight, and calm. My laptop glowed softly on the counter. Open to Nexus Advisory's expansion plans. Detroit would be our next branch. 40 small businesses on the brink, waiting for a chance to rebuild. As the city lights shimmered below, I thought about that empty chair at the engagement party, the space they'd left for me as a symbol of my exclusion. For months it had haunted me. But now, I saw it differently. It hadn't been an absence. It had been an opening. A space not for shame, but for choice. They had left me no seat at their table. So I built my own, and invited everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. My phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. She'd attached a photo from her ethics class at the University of Chicago. She was leading a discussion on a new case study she'd written, The Illusion of Loyalty, When Love and Fraud Collide. Beneath it, she'd written, Using our story to help others. Hope that's okay. I smiled. Our story. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like legacy. Outside, dawn began to bloom across the lake. Rose. Gold. Silver. I poured a cup of coffee and watched the light climb across the water. Somewhere in Naperville. Serafina was clocking in at the dental office. Her name tag pinned to her blouse. Somewhere in Milwaukee. Alexander was sitting in his childhood bedroom, trying to remember how to start over. And here I was, finally free. I thought about everything that had happened. Every cruel word. Every small humiliation. All of it had been designed to make me smaller. Instead, it refined me. The woman they called Housekeeper had cleaned house. Indeed, she'd swept away the lies, the vanity, the hollow rituals of wealth. She'd scrubbed her life until it shone again, until only truth remained. Now, when I walk through the doors of Crystal Gardens, I don't see marble and chandeliers. I see the faces of the families who celebrated their citizenship, the small business owners who rebuilt their dreams, the daughter who found her courage, and the woman me, who finally understood that dignity is not something anyone can take. It lives quietly inside you, waiting for the moment you stop asking for permission to exist. I raised my mug to the rising sun, to new tables. I whispered, and to every woman who was ever told she didn't belong at one. A soft chime broke the silence. Another email notification. New contracts. New beginnings. The world kept moving forward. And so did I. Before I closed my laptop, I glanced once more at the framed badge on my office wall. The words gleamed faintly in the early light. Victoria Housekeeper. They had meant it as insult. I had turned it into identity. And through it, I had built an empire of my own. If this story of resilience, justice, and quiet revenge moved, you take a moment to support stories like mine. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life tales of betrayal and redemption. Leave a comment, tell me which moment of justice hit you hardest. Turn on the notification bell because there's always another story of courage waiting to rise from the ashes.